Hello, my name is Professor Pura, and this is a video response to Professor Christopher Bellitto on the subject of humility. I recently read your article on humility and have also watched your YouTube videos on ageless wisdom, and it really got me thinking about a lot of the issues that I've encountered in my own life with just with being in quarantine and with COVID, also dealing with the death of loved ones. I know someone who lost his father due to COVID 19, and I myself had lost a dear friend to me basically before COVID had started. And that's really what prompted me to make this video. That a lot of the things you were talking about really resonated with me. And I just wanted to sort of respond and give you just my own perspective on why it is that humility is so important. And basically, to confirm a lot of what you said, that I think that it is kind of the crisis of our times, um, just relating to humility on several levels as a student, as a teacher, just as a person who has to deal with issues of mortality and just uh, of of loss and just of hardship. And I think that regardless of what discipline you're in, that it really is going to come into play. And especially with today being Thanksgiving, I'm just I'm grateful for the things that I do have, and would like to approach my own life with a renewed sense of humility. Um, but since we're both professors, and we have students that themselves are having um, potential problems with just with life and being quarantined and being isolated, I just wanted to just talk about that a little bit. Um, I think humility is really important as a student and as a teacher, because when you're humble, you are open to getting new information from the world and from learning. Um, I think there have been some times in my own life when I thought that I knew a subject well, and um, basically considered myself to have mastered it on some level, and that is basically an issue of pride, and it actually gets in the way of learning. Um, I think we've all have had, let's say, students. Let's say if you had assigned a paper or an assignment, and a student thought that a grade that they may have gotten on an essay was unjustified, and they may have been not willing to see just some of some of the errors, or just the some of the qualities in their writing that made it less than perfect. And I think that when we approach our own work and our own lives with a lot of pride, that it gets in the way of just seeing gets in the way of seeing things as they are, and just as students and teachers, like, it really helps to approach the subject with humility. And even as a teacher, knowing my subject of biology, I I try to open myself up to the possibility that it may be me that has something to learn from them. That um, just in teaching the subject, a lot of times my students have taught me things just about themselves, about interacting with people, about keeping an open mind. And I think that when you are in a position to, um, but when you're basically in a position where when you're not assuming things, that you become more open to experience and to to some of the lessons that you may not have anticipated. Um, and I think that this has some parallels with just science and with COVID-19, um, that I just am starting to see a lot of parallels between the environment and how we approach the subject with humility. Um, Now let me talk for a minute here about just about environmentalism, about just the source of COVID-19. COVID-19 is a virus that originated from what we call a zoonotic reservoir. It basically came from animals, from Chinese horseshoe bats, and these bats were living in caves that were relatively isolated, and basically were untouched by humans for a large portion of their history. And basically, uh, the disease itself, I think, arose because people were encroaching in on wildlife and basically reducing their habitat and going into places where we didn't venture before. And this basically, caused a lot of things to come out. A lot, the the bats basically expanded their range and were running out of food, and just the increased exposure with humans, I think, basically allowed the disease to uh, just to burst forth. And this this to me does speak of having to approach nature and even science with humility, because it's something that we caused. That it's not the disease is not just, it didn't just arise out of nowhere, but was basically the result of humans reducing the habitat of these animals. And I think that just our approach to nature and the environment really reflects a lot of our society's hubris. Just in terms of we use the planet's resources and we pollute the planet, and we don't always give back to the planet, and that can come back to haunt us as it has with COVID-19. And there are also other issues at work, like with overpopulation, with just how we use our resources, with how we manage our healthcare, and even with income disparities in in our societies. That all of these things can come back to haunt us if we don't come up with solutions to address them. And I think that um, it kind of mirrors a principle in Buddhism where um, man is kind of seen as the microcosm of the universe. And I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, just with something very abstract as the environment and trying to pull it together with the individual human being. But I think that there are parallels, that just how we approach the environment and how we see ourselves basically uh, creates a lot of the problems in our lives. And um, in in Buddhism, for instance, there is a big concept um, that has to do with ignorance and awareness, and basically the whole practice of meditation. Meditation itself is an act that requires a tremendous amount of humility, because you're basically taking this block of time and using it to essentially do nothing, but to examine your thoughts, just to be at one with with presence, just with feeling all the sensations of your body, and just of just letting the natural process of thoughts arise. And it doesn't have it doesn't have a concrete goal like many of the things um, that we do in Western culture do, but it does have a lot of benefits. And that is something that I think really reinforces the concept of humility, that we that you get more when you open up your mind to the possibilities of something happening. And it may not necessarily be something that's totally rational, but but it makes sense on an instinctual level and allows you to just to access more of your consciousness. And I also see this coming into play with relationships, just with psychology and how we approach each other. Um, just to take a very simple example, um, with the election that just passed, um, there were a lot of debates going on between Democrats and Republicans, and a lot of times people have this tendency to just state their opinions and have this sort of back and forth exchange, but without really listening to what the other person is saying and without really giving them a chance to be heard. And I think that we get the most we get the most effectiveness uh, out of communication when we're actually willing to hear what the other side has to say. And so in that article, when you talk about how pride is the crisis of the nation, it really did ring true for me. That I saw that when people are not willing to really listen to what the other person is saying, that the whole concept of communication and debate is kind of just lost. That it basically goes nowhere. That you actually have to give um, in order to get. And basically, I think that the whole practice of rhetoric and of trying to persuade people, it really depends on the ability to listen. And a lot of us have kind of lost that ability because we're so focused on on getting our own needs heard and having our own voices be represented, that we may not realize that we are actually silencing the other side. And this is just something that I see in a lot of arguments and also in a lot of interpersonal relationships, that just pride can end up getting in the way of really connecting with someone and getting to know them. And I think, especially for today, with it being Thanksgiving, that just trying to practice the act of gratitude really helps to connect with people and to connect with our our happiness that a lot of us have lost the connection with. And and in these times when we're quarantined and doing things on our own, living on our own separate islands, it it may be easy for a lot of people to just give in to a lot of sadness and a lot of doubting and worry. Um, and it's when you but it's when you consider what is going on with everyone else, when you try to empathize with them. In other words, when you try to approach the the subject the subject with humility, of seeing other people as being human beings, that I think is what really ends up changing the whole experience. That once you can realize that I'm not the only one that is feeling isolated and lonely, that there are other people out there that are. And when you try to make that connection, that's really what ends up changing things. That it's really what solves the problem. Like there really is no need for people to feel just isolated and lonely when there are so many people out there that are in the same boat. And it's just, I'm just seeing a lot of connections between this subject of humility. And even though you talk about it uh, on the level of religion uh, and also with politics and just how people view themselves, it's just, I'm seeing parallels in so many things with science and media and psychology and relationships, that it really starts to come full circle for me just how deep of a subject that is. Um, and one thing in particular um, that I was thinking about, uh, there I've been exploring this personality tool called the Enneagram, and there's this one personality in it, the type 2 personality, that basically is said to suffer from the sin of pride. Uh, and I don't want to get too much into the Enneagram because that will require its own separate video. But just I think all of us can relate to this idea of pride and how it can get in the way. Um, basically, I created this chart for another video, but I'm just going to use it here. But basically, the type 2 personality here is often called the giver or the helper. And I myself am a scientist. I'm not a psychologist, but I have found the Enneagram to be a useful thing for me just to relate to other people and just to really appreciate people more and just relate to them better. And um, there there is a two um, in my life, a parental figure that I am thinking about as I say this, but pride is something that can end up being problematic. That you know, well, first I should make the distinction between pride and false pride. I'm not talking about the kind of pride that basically gives you the courage to act on your own. Rather, when I say pride, and when I refer to the sin of pride, what I'm really referring to is this sense of self-aggrandizement, um, of inflating the self in order to deal with life's problems. And this is something that I see in some of the people in my own life, in my own family, um, and also in myself, and just it gets in the way of personal development just when people aren't willing to see their vulnerabilities, just aren't willing to see um, the things that can cause them to trip, that can trip them up in their own lives, that um, like for instance with the Enneagram 2 personality, they are often called the giver, and they often will give things to other people, um, and it seems very selfless and just very generous of them to do it. But when you get to know the person and just analyze what it is that they're doing, a lot of times they may not realize it, but they're not actually giving from a place of total generosity. That it actually has to do with self-interest, that people are kind of afraid to ask for what they really need, and so they try to get what they need in a manner that is kind of halfway false. And I'm not trying to say that anyone is bad. That the person that I'm thinking of is actually someone that I care deeply for, and happen to have a lot of love for. This is a parental figure, I should add, but it's just it is it's something that is in religion, but just has parallels in personal life, and just it I'm just amazed at the connection that I'm seeing with all of these things. Like, um, I think in Catholicism, I kind of recall this one um, story, or quote about um, a person being a thief, but not actually being not actually being bad. And okay, I just pulled this randomly from my memory, and I maybe it's a bad example, but I think what I'm trying to say is that there are appearances in real life that don't always tell the truth, or don't always say the complete story uh, of what it is to be someone. And you could have a paradox, of personality, where a person is doing something and they appear to be very selfless and generous, but it's actually coming from a place of pain, coming from a place of conflict. And maybe that would require its own video, but it's just as I'm proceeding with my own Thanksgiving meditation, this is something that I'm thinking about, and it's just I wonder if that is something that you have also encountered in your own studies of religion. Um, like there, I think a lot about the Bible and about certain stories, like the story of Job, of basically this person who loses a lot of things in his life. And I think a lot of my students and just people I know can relate to this, especially in these times, because a lot of us have lost um, things like our like jobs, like money, even relationships, or people. Um, well, we've lost people just through disease and through just losing contact with them. Um, we don't see the same. We don't see people face to face like we used to anymore. So just loss and disconnection is a part of everyone's lives now, and it's just going back to the story of Job, of losing things that you once had. Like, it really requires a sense of humility to be able to walk past it and to walk towards something good. Um, and I think it's embracing that humility is key to basically finding happiness again, to finding meaning again in your life. And um, this is something that I also encountered in Judaism with with this system of called the Kabbalah, which you probably have heard of it, but basically I drew this other diagram. This is the tree of life, I believe, and with the 10 sephiro. There's one particular sephiro, this one that's called uh, Netzach, and I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly. I'm not Jewish and I don't speak Hebrew, but this whole concept of Netzach, basically, as I understand it, it communicates the idea of suffering, of having to endure, of having to move past loss, and just being able to, well, basically, in order to move past the loss, that you have to embrace these concepts of humility. And that's basically what I get from this concept of Netzach, which stands across Hod. Um, and basically, I kind of recall in one of your other videos um, something about solitude, about kind of having this consent to solitude, just of I think all of us in quarantine, well, we definitely have been spending more time alone, um, and that could seem like a loss to many people, but it actually is also its own opportunity um, if you look at it with humility and just look at it with possibility. And in order to see possibilities, you basically have to be you basically have to be humble. and and when you can actually embrace that humility, it's like the world changes. um, the perception the our perception of the world is basically our world. And when you can perceive the world in a new way, in a way that is unassuming. um, and I think that this goes back to themes in your book with ageless wisdom, just with the kind of perception that a child has of seeing the world with possibility, and seeing it as something new, is something that can really add a lot of vitality to our lives. That just, if we are are open to experience, and just you know are open to accepting the things that we may have lost, that it starts to not be so bad, that it um like I'm thinking back to this one particular philosopher that I like. His name is Diogenes, and he's basically he was a leader of the Cynics, and he lived in this large um, ceramic pot. He was essentially homeless, but he was very proud of it, and just very it didn't consume him. Like, he was able to see the good in it, and just but basically with Diogenes, um he was humble, but in a way that was very that was very fortifying. That he um often compared himself to being a dog in public, and that may sound a little strange, but basically, um, dogs are unassuming, and they have a lot of noble qualities that he ascribed to the cynics. And basically, dogs are indifferent. They're shameless. Um, they exist merely, without judging themselves. And so it's an approach to life that is free of attachment and free of judgment. And that, to me, communicates humility. And just it, in this roundabout way, I'm just saying that the whole concept of humility just opens up a lot of possibilities to me, and shows me a lot of connections to things that I didn't necessarily see before. And so I wanted to basically make this video and just show you what I think. And um, and that's basically it. That I wanted to thank you, and to practice my own act of gratitude in saying um, that even though I may have lost certain things, like many of us have, that it's not so bad. That it offers a new perspective, and that that it really it really does matter. That you talk about in your book and in your YouTube videos about giving wisdom to other people, and about people who, as they age, like they give up what they had, just like they give their ideas to the new generation. And that makes sense to me. Like, it makes perfect sense. That it matters, that um, the day and of life. Um, and so, with that, I basically just wanted to say thank you. That um, there is a lot to be grateful for, and there is a lot to look forward to, despite everything that has changed, that we may have lost, that we may have also gained. And just to try to keep an open mind, and just be open to the possibilities, that you never really know what's going to happen. And even though, let's say, even though I'm a scientist, and I'm just exploring these things with psychology and self-development on the side, I think that it's valuable, that it matters to people. And just to thank you for your own ageless wisdom that you've imparted to us at Kane. So with that said, just I wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And just to anyone else watching this, to any students, just keep an open mind, that um, the world has so much more to offer, rather than just looking at the things that we've lost. And so just give thanks, have gratitude, right? Thank you very much. Have a good day. Happy Thanksgiving.